I think we're ready.
Thank you for being here today with LOWLINC. I'm taking my mask off right now just so everybody can hear me, but I will let you know the reason we have the box on the table is, well, twofold. One is we do try to encourage people when we have 10 or more in a room to wear their masks. And also, I did get emails from a couple of members and volunteers who said they weren't coming today because they have symptoms. So I just wanted to share that in case you wanted to, think about whether or not to mask up. So anyway, I really am so glad that all of you are here. I'm Jean Camo, for those of you who don't know me, as Executive Director of NAMI. I was reading something earlier because I used to be the Executive Director of NAMI.
We're so glad you came to this meeting.
Right. and there's a relationship to that, actually. We were just talking a minute ago about NAMI because we are focusing a lot on mental health this year, and we're trying to get NAMI to come here. So you can excuse me for that slip, please. But yeah, so we're excited about having the speaker series today. We're having it on Tuesday so that our wonderful speaker could be here today. Going forward, it will be on Thursdays at 1:30 in the afternoon, and we'll be bringing a variety of topics. Many are health and wellness focused and mental health related this year, but we'll have some other topics that which you can find out about when you follow our website or our emails. So just to kind of get a quick show of hands, how many people here today are LOWLINC members? All right. How about LOWLINC volunteers? Yay. And do we have folks who perhaps live in Lake of the Woods or the surrounding community who are here today as well? Okay, welcome. Welcome. I'm glad you're here too. We do have resources on the table, more information about the organization, so please feel free to pick those up if you haven't yet already. So I'm available for questions, and there'll be others as well when we wrap up the meeting today, but I hope you enjoy the presentation and have lots of questions for our presenter. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kim now, who will introduce our presenter.
I'm not a public speaker, and you're probably wondering why I crashed your meeting. But Alan and I were on a nonprofit council with the Chamber of Commerce in Culpeper before I moved here. And my mother passed away in May of Alzheimer's. And her Dementia Friends class, if you haven't taken it, consider taking it because it's great. And her resource guide over there is excellent. So I said, when she came and I saw her name, I had to introduce her. So, and I learned a new word from her today. Ellen Phipps, CTRS-MS, gerontologist, is the Executive Director of Aging Together, connecting older adults to resources to improve quality of life as we age. Ellen is the author of Connections, Engagement in Life for Persons with Dementia, a Complete Activities Guide. Before joining Aging Together, Ellen served as Vice President and later CEO of Alzheimer's Association, Central and Western Virginia chapter for a total of 18 years. Ellen has served as Director of Adult Day Centers both in England and in Virginia, and in 1997 introduced the first Montessori Intergenerational Adult Day Center in the state at the Java Adult Day Center in Charlottesville. Ellen holds a Master's of Gerontology degree from Virginia Commonwealth University, where she also has served as adjunct faculty, and a bachelor's degree in therapeutic recreation from the University of Colorado at Boulder. So I welcome Ellen to the meeting.
I'm going to take this off so you can hear me, but I'm sort of keeping my distance. So thanks for having me back. I was here a while ago in September, and I did a presentation, and I was asked to come back and repeat it. But I changed it up a little bit. And the Dementia Friends that she was just talking about, I kind of incorporated some of that in here. So those of you who know that program might recognize some of that as well. But just a show of hands, how many people here know somebody or has known somebody who has experienced either Alzheimer's or another type of dementia? Okay, that looks like About 100%. Not surprising. How many of you know of somebody, or have you yourselves been a caregiver for somebody? A lot of people. Okay, so I'm going to go through the basics again about dementia, but also talk about some communication strategies, and then I have there's a really short, nice little video that I hope will work as well. So feel free to stop me if you have questions. I don't mind that. I see I've already got a couple of questions up here, so I will get to those for sure. Or wait if you feel more comfortable, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. So we're just going to jump into this. So the first thing I want to highlight is that there's a lot of confusion often about dementia versus Alzheimer's disease, right? So anybody want to hazard a guess of what's the I like putting people on the spot. No, I'm asking for volunteers, so I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. Anyone like to hazard a guess? Like, we hear those words interchangeably. Oh, he has dementia, or he has Alzheimer's, and they're kind of used interchangeably. Does anybody want to kind of have a stab at the difference? You're all shy. That's okay. So really, the main difference is that dementia is like an umbrella term. It like encompasses like a category, and the term dementia refers to cognitive impairment. And there are many, many, many different types of things that can cause dementia. So when people say to me, oh, my dad was diagnosed with dementia, I'm like, well, what type of dementia? Because there's so many different kinds. Of course, Alzheimer's disease makes up the most common, it is the most common type of dementia, and it accounts for about 50% or more of the dementias. But there are listed here many others, but this list is not exhaustive, and so there's upwards to 70 or 80 different types of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common, and the other thing I want to say that often people don't realize is a person could have more than one type of dementia going on at one time. So that's another sort of interesting factor that we don't always realize. So most people know, I'm not a scientist, so most people understand the basic principles. Basically, the way our brains work is we interpret sensations from the body, we get signals, and I want to pick up my water, my brain's telling me I'm thirsty, and then there's a message that's getting sent down, and I'm going to now be able to go and reach for my water and take a little sip. And so our thoughts and memories and everything, you know, is in that incredibly important organ of our bodies, the brain. And so what happens with Alzheimer's and different types of dementias is brain cells are getting destroyed. So let's just look at that for a minute. Again, I'm doing very basic terms. We have about 100 billion nerve cells, and those neurons creating all those networks. And remember in science class about the synapses and how they connect and fire up to enable us to do everything we want to do and to store our memories and our thoughts and our feelings. And what happens in Alzheimer's disease is those connections there's death of the cells, and so the connections are getting destroyed and they're not happening as they should. And I like to sometimes make the analogy, like if you've ever had a really old beat up car and, you know, it's a really cold day out and you go outside to start up that car, you might find, you know, some mornings it's going to fire up right away and off you go. But other days you might be turning and turning and not be able to start it. Maybe eventually it will. And so it's those same kind of connections and synapses that they sometimes fire up and they sometimes don't in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's disease. So let's talk for a minute about who has Alzheimer's disease. I needed to update this slide because I noticed that the latest says over 6 million Americans have Alzheimer's disease now. And we're looking at 11 to 16 millions with Alzheimer's disease by the year 2050. So it's exploding. It's because people are living longer, we're getting better at diagnosing it, and that kind of thing. It's about 1 in 8 of those people over the age 65, but when you jump up to 85, it's about 1 in 2. It's about 50% of people over the age of 85 will experience Alzheimer's disease. But, yes?
You're saying I'm 84.
You're good. You're good.
So next year I got a 50-50. I don't believe it's almost 1 in 2. I mean, I don't know that many, that old people.
So it does increase as you get older, but I think
that I know, yes.
But what I think is really important, I think the takeaway here is that there's a common assumption that every older person will get dementia or will get Alzheimer's disease, and that's just not true, because it's a disease process. So, you know, if you're healthy and you have a lot of protective factors going on, and you don't have a lot of it in your family, you know, you may not. Just making me want to dance. I like that. So we know when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, the other thing that is critical to talk about is the family and the friends, because Alzheimer's is a disease not just for the person with the diagnosis, but the whole family and anyone who's involved with that family, that community, because caregiving for a person who has certainly advanced dementia is one of the most challenging types of caregiving that there is, and this is evidence-based. There's a lot of research to support that. 37 million of us know someone with AD. Well, you know, we all do in here. What's fascinating too is you think, well, you know, though we're just talking about people who are in nursing homes, but in actual fact, about 70% of people with Alzheimer's disease are not actually in nursing homes. They're living at home because maybe they're in the very early stages and the middle stages, and we tend to not go into a care facility with Alzheimer's until maybe the very end. So you've got lots and lots of people living at home, dealing with this, with caregivers, families taking care of them, trying to hire out help. And it can be a real challenge for families. Like, how can we do this? How can we afford this? What resources are out there to help? How can I maybe find a support group or that kind of thing? So it really does affect the whole family. We know that about half of all of the people living in nursing homes suffer from Alzheimer's and dementia. I was going to not go to this slide yet and just ask you, what do you think is the greatest risk factor? Because usually when you say, what do you think is the greatest risk factor, many people will say family or genetic, you know, but it's actually age. So we just talked about how the older you get, the more that increases your chances of getting Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, age is in fact the greatest risk factor. Now, if you have a family history, a parent, it may increase your chances. If you have 2 parents, it could increase your chances more. But it's not categorical, like absolutely, if my mother has it, I'm going to get it. No. Unless unless we're talking about something called familial, early onset, younger onset, it's really called now, younger onset Alzheimer's disease, which occurs typically under the age of 60. And they have researchers and scientists have identified a genetic component to younger onset. And there have been many studies of families where every sibling has the disease. And now they're looking at those people's like grandchildren and testing them to see if they have the gene. But there is a gene that has been identified that's connected to that. But if you're talking about over the age of 65 and age-related Alzheimer's disease, there has not been that genetic connection. That's different.
Probably 25 years ago, my grandmother was in a nursing home at the time, and she was diagnosed with, well, they called it dementia at the time, and she definitely was, she lived in her own world, and they told us at the time to keep an eye on for it, because it could be
Hereditary?
yeah,
Huh, that's
even though she
interesting.
was so old.
Yeah.
I assume they don't, that's not.
Was that a long
considered
time
the case
ago?
Yeah. it
Yeah.
was.
You know, we've come a long way. Alzheimer's disease was first described in like 1906 by a German psychiatrist called Alois Alzheimer. And he was very interested in this younger woman. She was like 40, but she was exhibiting the signs and symptoms of what they referred to back then as senile dementia. And he did a lot of work with her, and then upon autopsy, she was very paranoid, she was very combative, she had a lot of problems. And when, upon autopsy, they discovered, Dr. Alzheimer's discovered that she had these plaques and tangles in her brain. And that's when those first plaques and tangles were discovered, and it was from that then everybody referred to the disease as Alzheimer's disease, because he discovered those plaques and tangles. But I say that because that happened like way more than 100 years ago, right? And yet, what we know today, you would think we would know more, you would think we would be further along, given how long ago that happened. But we have learned a lot, and particularly in the last 15 to 20 years. So I imagine, that's something that was maybe thought of back then, that it would be hereditary regardless. But they're not saying that now. It could increase your chances, but it's not like a slam dunk.
Yeah, but my brother started having problems when he was in his, I guess, mid-60s. And they didn't give him a diagnosis. They didn't know what it was. And he really tried. He went to different, specialists for some years, because he knew there was medicine out there.
Right.
If they could figure out what it was, and they never did.
Typically, like going to a neurologist or a memory disorders clinic, at UVA has a wonderful memory disorders clinic, getting those extensive tests. And nowadays, when they diagnose, they get within like 98% accuracy with that diagnosis. Yeah. Okay. So people want to know, how long will this last? And that's a really hard one too, because it's really different for everybody. And in so many ways, the way the disease affects someone's behavior or mood or personality, the progression of the disease, it's so individualized. And I usually say that if I know 10 people with Alzheimer's disease, I know 10 different people with Alzheimer's disease. And it is very unique. Sorry about that. That's buzzing. All right. And so it can last, the average is about, 8 years, but it can last as long as 20 years. And I have worked with families throughout my career that they really were living with Alzheimer's disease for 20 years. And that's really tough. I just want to touch upon the treatments, and I'll leave this out maybe at that table if people want to see this afterwards. But this is, it's a really nice chart that I found from the Alzheimer's Association. They have a great website, alz.org. There's just a plethora of information on there about research, about treatments, about everything you can imagine. And they do this really nice chart listing the treatment and if it's approved for mild Alzheimer's or more severe or early, and then what the side effects are. So, and what's interesting, and the reason I really wanted to touch upon this is because there are some new drugs that are out there. So we know that there are different types of treatments. There's the ones that just kind of help with the symptoms, and these have been around for quite a while. And these are typically the cholinesterase inhibitors, and you've probably heard of a lot of these, like Aricept. Have many of you heard of Aricept or Exelon? And those kind of fall into that category. But people were, taking these thinking, oh, this is going to help stop the Alzheimer's, which it never was going to do. It can only help with some of the behaviors or some of the symptoms in some people. And the drugs, the treatments are usually very expensive, and they often have a lot of side effects. So you really want to talk to the doctor and really weigh the pros and cons and look at all the options. Memantine came out some years ago, and that was developed for later. Most of the drugs, yes, sorry.
What do you consider symptoms?
So, okay, that's good.
My dad had it, and the other thing is 8 to 10 years after diagnosis. Diagnosis can sometimes be a year or two into it, can't it?
Yes. We're going to go through all of the warning signs and the symptoms, and in this presentation, it's one of the things I added in from last time because I thought it would be very helpful to kind of compare normal, like what's to be expected for normal aging, and then what are the symptoms. But for example, things like, not being able to perform daily tasks, like maybe if you were somebody that was cooking all the time and now you're having trouble doing that. You were balancing the checkbook for the family and now you're just really struggling with that. You can't quite do it. Maybe you go for a walk in your own neighborhood and maybe you get lost. So those kinds of things. And so what they say is maybe some of these drugs can, or maybe you're getting more agitated than usual. And so then these drugs that were developed to help can possibly help with some of those symptoms, basically. And the other class, though, of the newer drugs, these are drugs that actually hope to slow down the progression of the disease. And this is new. The last time I did this talk, I wasn't even talking about this. I had to go back and do a little research and see what was new. And so again, those are mentioned here, big long names, try to pronounce them. The one that's, I can't pronounce it, ADUC, aducanumab, I don't know, ADUCANUMAB, and I know this was very big and it made headlines. There was a lot of controversy because it got kind of pushed through before all the FDA approvals, so you might have seen that one out there. And another one, lecanemab. And again, apparently these drugs have been approved for even mild cognitive impairment, which is kind of pre-Alzheimer's, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn into Alzheimer's, but they've been approved for basically very, very early on. So the minute you're noticing symptoms. And then I don't have a whole lot of information about the effectiveness of those drugs and how they're working, but I would say either go to this website, Mayo Clinic, or the Alzheimer's Association. They both have really good information there. Okay, so this is where I'm going to jump into the normal aging versus, you know, signs and symptoms. And some of you are volunteers in that you're visiting people in their homes, and so you may potentially come across somebody who might have showing signs of confusion, and maybe you're not sure what's going on and you're not sure how to handle it. Is that the kind of thing that might be occurring? Yeah? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this, because sometimes it really is hard to know, is that just normal aging, or is this a problem? And so the first thing we want to talk about is forgetfulness. So we all forget. We all forget the names of people. We might forget appointments, but you know, we remember later. I was in a meeting last week and I said something like, well, do we want to meet on a Wednesday again? And everybody looked at me and said, today's Tuesday. And I was like, oh, gotcha. Okay. Do I have Alzheimer's? I don't think so. Hoping I don't. But that would not be something to be really worried about, because as soon as I was reminded of the day of the week, I remembered it then for the rest of the day. But with Alzheimer's, somebody who might be experiencing early Alzheimer's, memory loss that disrupts their daily life, so they might be forgetting important dates, maybe birthdays of a spouse or children. They might be repeating the same question over and over again. So that's a little bit different from, oh, what day is it today? Or, oh gosh, I forgot about that meeting. So another sign is, you know, we all make mistakes or errors, slight errors when we're balancing a checkbook, for example, right? We can all make a mistake. But with a person with Alzheimer's disease, it's going to be a little bit more than that. What's going to happen, you might see changes in their ability to plan or solve problems. So they might be thrown, like maybe they've run out of checks and now they're completely thrown. Instead of going to order more checks, or I mean, I don't know. I talk to my kids, nobody uses checks anymore, so I don't, you know, bear with me on that example, but following a recipe, for example, I actually did. I worked with a family some years ago, and the woman would always make the same, I think it was a lasagna at Christmas time, and she would always make the same recipe. It was her standard recipe. And how the kids knew that something was wrong was she forgot how to make it. And she was running around, she was saying, does anybody know where my recipe is? Oh, Mom, you've never used a recipe for that. And she just, that was one of the first signs that they even knew that there was anything. Wow, that's weird. Why is Mom needing a recipe all of a sudden? So that was their first clue that there was something wrong. You know, sometimes we all might need some help with the remote control or a microwave setting. I'm kind of thinking to myself here a little bit. And that's perfectly normal for normal aging. You know, we all go through that. But a person who might be experiencing a more serious problem of dementia or Alzheimer's, they might have trouble completing familiar tasks, like maybe just going to the local store, getting in the car and driving to the store. That might become overwhelming. They might get lost. It's too much. And again, even organizing like a shopping list might be too much for a person who has Alzheimer's disease. Getting confused about the day of the week, I used that example already, but you recall it later, perfectly normal for normal aging. But a person who might be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or showing symptoms of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, they might get really confused with time and place. They might be losing track of dates, important dates, and even seasons. And you know, sometimes you might see, oh, it's sunny out. I mean, even though it might be 30 degrees, so they see sun, they might just go out in a t-shirt and not even think to dress appropriately for the weather.
Conversation this morning.
What's that?
I said I had that conversation with my mother this morning.
Oh.
It's nice out, I don't need a coat. It's 39 degrees, Mom.
Yeah.
Think you might.
Yes, exactly. So you see, so that's a little bit different from, you know, somebody who might have forgotten that today was Monday, but as soon as you told them, they knew it was, you know, it was Monday.
You're fine.
Yeah, so then, the other thing is visual changes. So a lot of times as we age, it's very common, you know, our vision definitely can get, you know, worse. We can experience cataracts, and that's pretty normal. Like most people I talk to around my age are talking about cataracts and stuff like that.
This call is from Comcast Xfinity.
But
To let you know that
with a person who has Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia, they might have other visual and spatial problems. For example, let's say, for example, this carpet was like a very big floral, colorful pattern. A person with Alzheimer's disease might think that they're actually maybe stepping in a hole or have to step over something. So visually and spatially, that can be affected. Stepping from a floor into an elevator, for example, might cause a lot of anxiety and concern because of the spatial awareness. And also, they may have some trouble reading. Now, my dad had Alzheimer's disease the last 4 years of his life. He was a very brilliant, hometown, old-fashioned family doctor in a small town where we grew up. And he loved to discuss politics and books and history. And it was very devastating to watch him kind of go through this decline in his later years. But he was able to retain the ability to read. So, sometimes you can. Now, what I noticed was he was still looking at the paper and looking at magazines, but I did notice that it was a little bit too much. So what I did with him was together we created a book about him and on the computer. So we just said, Dad was born in Brooklyn, and he used to go visit Ebbets Field, and he used to go watch the baseball. And so I did like one sentence on a page, and it was all about him, so of course he was interested. And he would take the book that we made, and I just did it printed out the pages, and it wasn't like a fancy book. Put some pictures on there too. And it turned out that it was one of the best activities he could do with his caregivers. So when we weren't there, the caregivers would say, oh, they used to call him Doc. Hey, Doc, you want to read your book? And he'd be like, yes. And then he'd start, my name is David Bykoff. And then he'd turn the page. I was born in Brooklyn. And, he got such joy out of that. And my siblings would be like, well, what can you do with Dad anymore? You can't really hold a conversation with him anymore. So how can you spend 8 hours with him all day? And I said, well, we do different activities, and I'm joining him where he's at and trying to engage him. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm jumping way ahead. All right. I'll calm down. So, the warning signs. I think that idea about they maybe can't read anymore. They maybe can't read the way they used to, but they might be able to read just single words or small sentences. So just to keep that in mind. Oh, that's another fun one. I obviously have very boring ringtones. So, let's see, did we do this one already? Finding the right words. Sometimes we all might have trouble coming up with a word. I mean, I do that all the time. I'll be in the middle of a sentence and I want to say something and I can't remember that word that I'm thinking of, but I usually think of it later. But a person who has Alzheimer's disease, they may have a lot of trouble with a lot of words in communicating, and even in writing could be a challenge. And they might have trouble even following a conversation as well. And if they're in the middle of a thought or the middle of a sentence, they might stop altogether. And that's it. I'm sorry, I don't remember what I was saying. That could happen to any of us, but it's sort of like what the difference is too. This is how you want to think about the difference too. We can all do a lot of these things, but if it's disrupting daily life, that's when it's really becomes a problem. So we're messing up here and there. We're all allowed these mishaps. We're functioning fine, we're still getting to our appointments, we still might be working, we're still driving, but we're messing up sometimes, that's okay. But once you start having so many of these issues that it's beginning to be hard to function, I drove to the wrong place, I got in my car, I got lost. I tried to do the checkbook and I couldn't. And that's kind of how you can differentiate between normal aging changes and when there may be something more serious going on. So making a bad decision once in a while, I think we all do that. But that decreased or poor judgment, and that can sometimes be one of the first things that happens, like that poor judgment. And where I see this happening a lot is with scams. And a lot of times, if there's some dementia going on and a person is at home answering the telephone, they can really fall prey to scams. And the scams, unfortunately, I mean, that's a whole nother topic for one of these presentations. I mean, they have just triple-fold since the pandemic. They're just, it's a really big concern. And so if there's dementia involved, the person might not realize and just take it for face value, you know. And they'll say things like, your granddaughter is in the hospital and she needs help. Well, if you hear that and you have dementia, you're probably going to say, oh, what can I do to help? Sometimes, you know, we all maybe pull away from social obligations at times, but again, a person with Alzheimer's or dementia, you might be looking at withdrawal from work or social activities. Maybe they were a big fan of a sports team and they're not really able to keep up with that favorite team anymore. But again, it's sort of not the odd, I don't think I feel like going out tonight, but more of a way more time staying in and being withdrawn. And again, through the pandemic, we've seen this with a lot of people, not even people just with dementia, self-included, you know, staying home, working from home, you know, people are finding it harder to come back out again. So there are 5 key messages. This is something that comes from the Dementia Friends, Virginia, and those of you who know about this program, you might recognize this, but I think it's a great, easy way to remember just some important messages. If you don't take anything else out of today, a few key messages. So the first one is that dementia is not a part of normal aging. Okay, there's a disease process going on. Not everyone who gets old will develop dementia. Dementia is caused by diseases of the brain, and the most common one is Alzheimer's disease. It is the most common type of dementia. Dementia is more than just memory problems, as we were talking about. It can affect thinking, judgment, communication, speech, being able to do everyday tasks, way more than just memory. It's possible to have good quality of life with dementia. My dad, perfect example. Engaging him in those kind of activities gave him so much pleasure. Reading his book. Another thing that we found I got a big computer for him in the facility where he was, and we found some like Monet art show. He would love to look at this, and it was to music. And so I could just get that started, and he'd just sit there and he'd watch it. As his dementia progressed, I found, again, I found this woman on, I think she was on YouTube. Her name was Susie Q, and she had a piano, and it was Sing Along with Susie Q. And I would play that for my dad, and he's singing right along, and she's a very lovely looking woman, and he's just smiling, and the foot's tapping, and was he reading great novels? Was he having sophisticated political discussions with? No, he wasn't doing any of that. What we had to do was join him in his world where he was at and figure out how to engage him at his level to make all the difference. And there's more to the person than the dementia. People with dementia are a valuable part of our community. And I think it's important to remember that too. They still are a person, they have things to contribute, and as much as we can involve them and ask for their opinions and ask for their contributions, that is really critical. And a lot of times we don't do that. Years ago I ran a group for people who were diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the early stages. And we used to say to them, well, what are some of the things that you're dealing with, as you're experiencing this disease? And I can't tell you how many times people talked about the fact that gets them so mad because people don't come up to them directly and ask them questions anymore. They're asking the wife or the kids or the other people, and then they say, it's like we're not even there. And they're talking about me. They're asking about my likes and dislikes right in front of me. And we heard that over and over again. So it's really important, when we talk about communication, there are some strategies to how to communicate, because you're going to have to drill it down a little bit, not have very big, long, sophisticated conversations, but there's ways of doing that to meet them at their level and allow them to respond and be independent. Okay, I think this is going to work. This is just a little video. Let's see if it works.
Dementia is caused by a disease that damages brain cells. This damage interferes with how brain cells communicate with each other. When brain cells cannot communicate, a person's thinking, behavior, and feelings can be affected. The brain has many different areas, and each one is responsible for different functions. For example, memory, judgment, and movement. When cells in an area of the brain are damaged, that area cannot function efficiently. Think of your brain as a set of bookcases. The books in one bookcase are memories, logic, procedures, and the knowledge you have acquired over a lifetime. Let's call this your logical brain. In the other bookcase, the books are your emotions and feelings. Love, happiness, sadness, anger, confidence, acceptance, rejection. Let's call this your emotional brain. In the early stages of dementia, the logical brain begins to lose some of the ability to remember things or people. The logical brain may no longer have the ability to remember names or dates or how to perform certain tasks. As dementia progresses, this part of the logical brain begins to stop functioning. At first, it may be complex thinking and procedures that become hard to complete. Skills like math, using language, completing procedural tasks start to fade. As the dementia progresses, more and more of these memories, knowledge, and ways of doing things continue to fade away. The logical brain becomes incapable of remembering or completing tasks. Also, the emotional brain begins to lose some of its ability to control emotions. In the later stages of dementia, the logical brain can no longer function. Memories are gone. The ability to complete even the smallest and simplest tasks are gone, and many of the emotions are gone. However, the emotional brain continues to have some functionality, and emotions become paramount in person-to-person interactions. In the latest stages of dementia, someone may not be able to remember your name or even have the ability to communicate, but often they will still have the ability to feel.
So that idea of being able to retain the emotions, people used to say to me when I was running an adult day center for people with Alzheimer's disease, a large part of what we would do every day would be activities. I was, always trying to engage people in different activities. And sometimes family members or others would say, so why do you just do all these activities all day with them and they're never going to remember? So why do you bother? So kind of an interesting concept, but my response was that it's true that they may not remember what they did, but if they had a pleasant, positive, emotional experience, that good feeling will carry on beyond what they would remember of the activity. And so I think that's important to remember as well. So sometimes a picture speaks 1,000 words. I'm just going to ask you, what do you see here? What strikes you?
Cauliflower.
Yes, cauliflower. I didn't bring my, sometimes I bring my cauliflower. How much smaller the Alzheimer's brain is. This is a brain of a normal, healthy, older person upon autopsy, and person of a similar age that had Alzheimer's. So so if you think of a cauliflower and how a fresh cauliflower, and it's firm and it's large, and if you left it in the fridge for a few months, it would kind of look a lot different. It wouldn't be firm anymore. It'd be kind of soggy and saggy, and there'd be holes in it and lots of spaces. And so a lot of times, I think that really just hits home how devastating this disease can be, because sometimes we want to say to somebody with Alzheimer's, well, come on, you knew my name this morning, why don't you know it this afternoon? Well, if your brain or my brain looked like that, we wouldn't be able to function. And so I think that just really hits it home how much. It's not like if somebody has a broken leg and they're in a cast and you can see it. I think part of the problem is with this disease, you can't see it. And so sometimes it's hard to understand because we can't see it. So I want to talk a little bit about communication and some different ways and some different strategies for communicating. And I want to start by highlighting that We may not realize it, we take so much for granted, but even a simple task, such as brushing your teeth, can be very, very complicated for a person with Alzheimer's. So if I said to you, you know, how many steps do you think there might be involved in brushing your teeth? Just take a guess. 5. Maybe more than 5.
It could be 20 or 30.
Could be
depending on
20 or 30.
How difficult it is
Yeah.
for you.
We've done this exercise with some different groups, and you can get up to close to 100 different steps. And you're thinking of, you know, first you have to, like if I'm sitting in this room, the first thing I have to do is think about what I'm going to do, brush my teeth, and I have to stand up. Then I have to walk to the door. Then I have to open the door, and so on. You could see how that goes into getting into the bathroom, finding the toothbrush, finding the water, finding the cup, finding the toothpaste, and so on and so forth. So if we say to a person with dementia, come on, it's time to go brush your teeth, it could be overwhelming. They might just stand there and look at you. They have an idea, they may know what you want them to do, but it's suddenly completely overwhelming because there are so many steps involved. So one strategy when we're working with people who are living with dementia is to kind of break the steps down into smaller segments. So for example, instead of Hope, go brush your teeth, you know, we might do, Hope, come with me. And then she might put a hand out, and then we'll go together to the bathroom. Maybe I'll put the toothpaste on the brush. I want to maintain her independence as long as possible, so I don't want to do everything for her. But I've now chunked it down to some simple steps, and now I say, here you go. And then more than likely, she will go ahead and brush her teeth. So we can break tasks down into simple steps to help people remain independent and do things. So when I want to talk about communication, we want to always remember to treat the person with dignity and respect. It can be hard and it can be frustrating for caregivers, and I get that, I really do. But it's always important to be aware of your feelings, because if you're getting really frustrated, maybe walk away, count to 10, whatever you have to do. And it's really important to allow time for them to respond. So kind of depending on what stage they're in, like in the middle stages of the disease, it might take somebody 20 seconds or more to respond. So again, I'm going to pick on Hope because she's right up here. If I said, you know, hi Hope, how are you today? She might look at me for a long time, and maybe she's thinking what I said, she's processing it. And so don't give up too quickly. Wait that, and 20 seconds can feel like a long time. And then suddenly she might come back and say, good, I'm fine. So it's allowing that time for that response. Offer comfort and reassurance. You know, a lot of times people who are living with dementia, they might say things that are absolutely incorrect. You know, they might start reminiscing, remembering, oh, remember when we lived in California? Whatever. And instead of correcting them, because how many of us feel good when somebody corrects us and tells us, oh, we don't like that, it's not a good feeling. Instead of correcting or criticizing, you have to kind of think, so what? Like, is this really important that they're telling somebody that we lived in California? No, it's not a big deal. So you can kind of go with the flow. Sometimes you might want to, if words are really difficult for the person and it's hard for them to communicate, you might want to try some nonverbal communication. So like what do you want to drink? That might be too much. Would you like water or juice? That might help them to make the decision, because it's not as overwhelming as that open-ended question, what do you want to drink? Physically, when you're approaching a person, it is better to try to, come from the front, don't startle them. If they're sitting, you don't want to sort of be towering over them. It could feel a little intimidating, so maybe if I was going to talk to Hope, I would just pull up a chair and sort of sit at her level and have eye contact with her. And that can be a little bit less intimidating.
Can I add
Yeah.
one thing?
Yes.
That my sister-in-law did. My brother has dementia, and he loves to drive. He still will get the car. She may have hidden the keys completely now,
Oh, wow.
but he would still get them occasionally. So I drove with him when we went to get our virus shots, and she insisted that I sit in the front. Brian was driving, and she sat right behind him. And when it was time for a turn, she would kind of come up behind him in a very gruff, low voice. Paul, you need to turn right here.
Wow.
And she did that with every turn, and I thought, well, that sounds weird. And then I realized that when my husband had cancer, and I had to drive him to the hospital, he hated it. Hated being driven by his wife. And he said he looked it up and it was an old guy thing. Nobody likes being driven by the wife. So I thought, well, that must be part of what she's doing, using a male type voice. So it's not his wife giving
Giving the directions. Yeah, that's very clever. That is very clever.
Yeah.
I think thinking outside the box and coming up with different solutions that are going to work, because each situation is so completely different, and every person is different, every family is different. So coming up with those creative outside of the box solutions that work for you, it's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. It's important to use short, simple phrases as well when you're speaking, and speaking slowly. And then, as we said before, allowing that time for them to respond. Sometimes, again, instead of an open-ended question, maybe a statement like, do you want to go out for a walk? You might get a no. 9 times out of 10 with my dad, if I said, do you want to do, he would say no. If I said, Dad, come on, come with me, we're going outside, he would just come and go with me, and there was no argument. So it's, again, it's kind of how you phrase it. Turning negatives into positives. So when I was running the adult day center, there was this petite little lady who could be very fierce, and she decided she was leaving, and the door, it was a locked unit because we couldn't have people wandering out to the street. And she would stand by the door and she would say, "You let me out of here." And she'd be like really yelling, and then she'd look at me and she'd say, "You, get over here and let me out." And so if I had said, no, Dorothy, you can't go out that door. You can't. Come away from that door. She would have blown up. It would have just escalated, because who do you think you are telling me what to do? But if I said, "Oh, Dorothy, you want to go out? Okay. Hey, before we go out, do you want to come over here and have some ice cream with me?" "Oh, yeah." And there she would be, and then we'd sit down at a table and we'd have some ice cream, and then she'd forget all about going out. So you have to be very thinking outside the box and thinking of, instead of, "No, you can't do that," or whatever it might be, how about we do this instead? Notes, using notes or pictures, particularly in the early stages, it can be really helpful to like label the kitchen cupboards, dishes, cups, plate, you know, whatever. That can be helpful in the early stages. As the disease progresses, that's not going to be as helpful. As they, you know, they get to a point where they won't be able to read that, or they won't be able to process that.
Does it help at that, can you go from words to pictures?
Yes, sometimes pictures can work. We tried something with my dad. It kind of worked. There were these phones you could get where you could put a picture of his children on the big, you know, front of the phone. You could put these and, you know, and connect that to their numbers, so he could see daughter Ellen, and he could hit Ellen's picture, or daughter Barb, and hit that one, and he could call us that way. We thought this would simplify things, but what happened was sometimes he would look at the phone, and in his frustration he would be like, "Where the hell are the numbers?" You know. So you know, it can work in some cases, but maybe not in others. So we thought we were being very clever with that. I just want to reiterate those 5 messages as I finish up here. Dementia is not a part of normal aging. It's caused by diseases of the brain. It's not just about memory problems. There are a lot of other things involved. There's more to the person than their dementia. And this is why we talk about, we use language like a person living with dementia now, instead of a person with dementia, or sometimes you hear something like a demented person. We talk about a person living with dementia, person living with cancer, right? Same thing, we do that. And there you have it. So that is the end of my slide show, and I want to remember to take this little thing out for your audio piece. This is yours for your audio. Oh, this is very important for you guys. But I am very happy to take, well actually I can start with these questions. Dementia and violent behavior, English as a second language, reverting back to yes. So I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but yes, people can get violent or agitated, but there's always a reason why that happens. So it's if you think about it, if you have a pounding headache, let's say you had a migraine, and you didn't know how to ask for a pill, or to get medicine, and you didn't know where to go to get the medicine, you might eventually become pretty agitated because you've got a migraine and you're not getting any help for it, you're not getting any relief. So, there's often reasons why people do become violent and agitated. We hear about people with dementia doing that. It's not really as common as you think it is. It does happen. A lot of the times, not every time, but a lot of the times, the way we approach them and communicate with them can de-escalate a potential violent outburst. I'll give you this, I love using this example, but it's another quick example with my dad. I was visiting him down in the facility where he was in Texas. It was about 100 degrees outside. I said, "Dad, we're going to go into the dining room." He puts on these leather, furry, insulated gloves and his cap to go to the dining room. And it's 100 degrees outside, and we're not even going outside. And I said, "Dad, what are you doing? We're just going for lunch. You don't need your gloves." He started getting really, and it was not common for him to get agitated with me, but he was like, yes, I do. And I'm like, Dad, you don't need, and here's where all my training goes out the window. Dad, you don't need those gloves. You know, what are you doing? Just take them off. And he was like, you get away from me. You get back. And he was getting really, really, really agitated. And finally, I realized my mistake. And I'm like, okay, Ellen, take a deep breath, step back. You're not going to reason with him. Let's just think of something else. So I just left it. And we started walking. He has his walker. He's got the gloves. He's got his cap. And we're going out the door. And we have to pass the bathroom. Now remember, he's a doctor. So I said, oh, hey, Dad. Do you think you should wash your hands before you eat? Oh, yes, absolutely. And he goes into the bathroom, pulls off the gloves, and like washes his hands. So, reverting back to a first language is very common. We do see that a lot. And so it will be important to have people that will be able to communicate with the person in that situation. Baseline testing available locally, great question. As it happens, when you go for your Medicare wellness check, you are entitled to a cognitive assessment, and you can just get a baseline. The doctor should do that for you if you ask for it. It's part of the Medicare wellness checkup. But otherwise, I don't know if there are other clinics. I don't know if UVA, if they'll do a baseline testing, but they will.
Are we talking a mini mental, or what do they do now for baseline?
I would think something similar to that. What's that?
Maybe a MOCA?
A MOCA. There are a couple of different tests out now that they can do, but just to get a baseline is a great idea, because then if you're worried or your spouse is worried and you go back next year, you have something to compare it with. So I think that's a great idea. Any other questions or yes?
What is the best way to approach someone when you think that they could have a problem and that they should seek some testing or diagnostic,
That's a good question. It's a great question. So, sometimes this can go two ways with people who have Alzheimer's. Sometimes they're very aware of something wrong. And sometimes, and there's actually a medical term for when they're not. I can't remember the long name of that term, but you know it?
Now I can't say it though. Anosognosia.
Anosognosia, thank you. So there's that big long term, which indicates that, they don't know what's going on. That's when you get the, hey Mom, I think you seem to be struggling to remember things lately. Should we go get that checked out? Why would I get that checked? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not having any trouble remembering. And so it kind of depends. So if you're working with somebody who's aware that they're struggling, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to say, hey, I noticed, you were struggling a little bit, maybe with the appointments, or I noticed you struggling with that recipe or the checkbook, whatever. Maybe it would be good to just get it checked out. What I would also say is you can say things like, you never know if there's a vitamin deficiency going on, or if, there's depression. It could be lots of different things that could cause confusion and memory loss. It doesn't necessarily have to be Alzheimer's or a different type of dementia. So you can sort of suggest, hey, maybe you have a vitamin deficiency. Maybe we should get that checked out. But having those conversations is important. And I think for volunteers, if you're visiting people and nobody ever mentioned anything about dementia or memory loss, but you seem to be observing this, you might start with the family, the the caregiver and say, you know, just curious, is there anything going on here? It can be a hard conversation.
Thank you.
Yes?
You said Alzheimer's could last up to 20 years. I mean, is death the end?
Yes.
I mean, it is.
Yes,
So it's
I
going-
neglected to say that. Alzheimer's, a person will die from Alzheimer's disease. Now, it could be something else would get to them before that, but if it doesn't, basically what happens is with the damage to the brain, and eventually the brain, body organs are beginning to shut down. You eventually lose control of your bowel and bladder, your ability to speak. Eventually you will be bedridden, and eventually you won't know how to swallow. And so, unfortunately, Alzheimer's disease does cause death. Yes.
I once read that sleeping supine can lead to dementia. Has that been taboo?
I have not heard that, but I will tell you, if you go to the Alzheimer's website, you know, they have all different kinds of studies, and they also have different pages about, like, myths. Like, one of the things we used to hear was about aluminum in the pots and pans. Remember that from all those years ago? Well, they've disproved that now, so.
Oh, good, I can
You
use
know.
my.
Probably get something else from that.
Yes.
My sister memorizes the lyrics to a song, one a week. She was told that this would help. You know, we both saw my dad. Is there exercise in your brain?
Yeah.
Is there any truth
Yeah.
to that?
That's another great question. So what can we do to prevent it? And so there's a lot about brain health. And basically what we do for a healthy heart is good for a healthy brain. So what do we mean by that? It's diet. It's diet like that Mediterranean diet with fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and exercise, and plenty of exercise, and some of the brain games or that you can do to stimulate your brain, like you were talking about there. What the research seems to say is if it's something you've always done, like you've always done the crossword and you're really good at it, that's probably not going to help that much. But learn a new language, learn something new, learn to play an instrument that you've never played before. Learning a new skill can help protect. And there's a lot of research and a lot of information out there currently about ways to protect your brain. And you know, hey, if you can stave it off for 2 or 3 years, you can't prevent it necessarily, but you know, who knows, if you're up there in your 80s and 90s and you can stave it off for a couple of years, that's a good thing. Yes?
If there is you were talking about it when you first started, say an aunt, a brother, and 2 cousins in the family that has Alzheimer's, is there more chance of that person?
Aunt, brother, 2 cousins. Let me ask you a question. Are they getting it at a younger age, under the age of 65, or older?
Probably older, like in their 70s.
Oh, okay. I think what the research would show is that if you have multiple family members with it, it can increase your chances, but it doesn't necessarily mean you will get it. It can increase your risk.
Now, my friend had started getting it when she was in her late 50s, and she would ask the same questions of her husband or whomever over and over and over again. So he just said to all of us, when you answer her, don't say repeat yourself or whatever, just pretend as though it's the first time that she asked you that question, and answer her as though she's never asked it before. And it seemed to work really well.
Yeah,
for her.
that can work. And then sometimes you can do, like, for example, if somebody's saying, what time is it? and then another 10 seconds. What time is it? What time is it? You know, yes, you could just answer like you never heard the question before. Sometimes you might say, you know, it's 3 o'clock. I'm wondering, is there something you were hoping to do today? And, you know, you can kind of try to change it.
Well, she would like ask for her husband would be in the next room, and she would say, "Where's Tierney?" And one of us would say, he's in the other room. If he heard her, he would answer the very same way. "Honey, I'm right here.
Yeah.
Come around the corner and look, I'm right here." Well,
And
sometimes
that
she
would
didn't
help.
remember to go to the corner, so she would just ask again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he would come out.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, if that's going on and on and on, if you can engage them in a meaningful activity, they might kind of forget about all the questioning for a while, like getting into, you know, listening to music or dancing or, you know, baking cookies
She
or something.
couldn't do that anymore.
Again, you know, just at her level, whatever she might enjoy, you know. Sometimes that can help.
Well, he just said, and it would work. He would just say, answer her as though she only.
Yeah, and then that was it. So that's a good strategy for her. Yeah.
It's
Yes.
very unusual for it to progress very fast. I had my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, started, and she was a school teacher and a librarian, and she got it in her early 70s, and by 75 she'd forgotten how to eat and would die. So,
Yeah.
matter of 3 years.
That sounds really fast, but it can be anywhere from like 2 to 20 years. But in my experience working with people and families over the years, when it goes that fast, I've sort of noticed in some instances it's something other than Alzheimer's disease, like maybe it was a Lewy body dementia or a frontal lobe dementia, sometimes a different type of dementia, where it went a little fast, seemed to go more quickly.
What is the testing to determine what type of dementia you have?
At like a neurology clinic, for example, one that I know of, there aren't that many around here at UVA, they have in Charlottesville, there's a whole team approach for neurology, and they do a whole workup, and then they do all these tests, and then they determine, they'll say, yes, there's some dementia, and actually we think it's Lewy body dementia, or we suspect this is vascular dementia, or we suspect this is Alzheimer's, you know, or whatever. Or we suspect there's Alzheimer's, but we also think there's a vascular dementia going on with it. So they can really fine tune that. A lot of the approach is the same, not necessarily the medications. I think the Alzheimer's medications are really targeted just for Alzheimer's. So, you know, there is always a question of, you know, do you want to go through all that testing or not?
Well, it'd be kind of nice to know what
Nice to
you're
know.
up against. Instead of just somebody asking you 5 questions and deciding that
Right,
you have Alzheimer's.
that's what it
which
is.
What a neurologist is.
Yeah, it can be a lot more extensive testing than that.
Yeah.
Do they do the shock treatment anymore?
Yeah, that would not have been used for Alzheimer's. That's more sort of in the mental health category for severe depression and other ailments. And I'm not really very up on that. I don't know if anybody else is.
I read that they have started trying it for some things, just because it did have some success before.
Yeah.
But certainly not as a casual thing.
Yes.
See these ads for over-the-counter medications or treatments for supposedly for, you know, to keep your mental awareness better. I mean, is there any truth to that? Is there
I don't
any benefit
think
to
that
it?
most of those are not evidence-based or pass the litmus test for efficacy.
I don't know that I've ever heard of a doctor recommending them.
There's a reason for that. They don't like anything that's not pharmaceutical.
used to be.
Is it true that as you, someone is living with dementia, that they lose their memory backwards? Like the most current memories go first and the more core memories from
There is some
childhood?
truth to that. They tend to, yes, oftentimes memories from, like, they might forget what they had for lunch, but they might have memories of their childhood, home or something like that. So yes, there is an element of truth to that.
You know, my father said the same thing, and he didn't have dementia.
Yeah.
I think.
He just as he was getting older, he said, I think,
Yeah.
those are the things that he retained. Was there a question in the back?
I have a niece and a half-sister who have Parkinson's disease. Now, does that lead to dementia, or does it have to lead?
There can be, you can get a dementia associated with Parkinson's, yes. So it's, again, I don't know that it always happens, but I know that is fairly common to see in people with Parkinson's that there can be some dementia.
Does it matter at the age? Because my half-sister's in her 70s and my niece is in her 40s.
Wow. I'm not sure. I would, I would bet the Mayo Clinic research would have some good answers on that. Wow, that's something. Yes?
I'd just like to comment on the role music can play in working with people that have dementia. It can be very effective. Calming for one thing, but also can put them in touch with memories that they may have otherwise lost. They could be able to sing the lyrics to a song that you haven't heard in a long time.
I think that music is one of the most powerful tools for working with people with dementia, and there have been a lot of studies that show that when music is used in this way with people with dementia, you can actually reduce medications, and there's a lot of research behind the efficacy of music and expressive arts, painting and things like that.
If I could just share a quick story about that. I have a brother-in-law who died of early onset Alzheimer, and he had been a musician all his life. And one of the things he did was that he went and played at the facility in his town, okay? And he was always such a huge hit. And he ended up at that facility, and they played for him. So it was a very powerful, it was the core that he held on to the longest.
Yeah, and oftentimes that part of the brain and that music will last much longer than everything else, so, yes. So, well, thank you so much.